So today we're working on 4.2 and this is covering slope. So we've been working with graphing equations using a table. And so we're going to be looking at different things like graphs, tables, and just given two different points to figure out what our slope is. So we're building up to something new. To start off, we have to talk about what slope is. So you might have heard the word slope before. We definitely talked about it in 7th grade. Slope is represented by the variable m. So anytime you see an m, that means slope. Slope is a ratio of the change in y, which is your rise, to the change in x, which is your run, between 2 points on the graph. That sounds like a lot, but it really just boils down to this equation down here. We know that slope is m, slope is rise over run, so a ratio just means a fraction. So it's rise over run, or we're talking about the change in y. When we're talking about change, we're looking at a subtraction problem. So we're figuring out the change in y over the change in x. So we're going to be using this formula down here to complete this entire lesson. So make sure you have that equation written down. So the first thing that we're going to look at is graphs. So this is going to be our part A. So let's start off by looking at that graph on the left side there. I drew a line out for you, and I actually drew some arrows out for you as well. So if we're looking at that arrow, we're looking for the change in y over the change in x. So when we're doing this, our y is how much we go up or down, and our x is how much we go left or right. So change in y is 1. So I'm going to write it up there. Change in y is 1 over change of x. That little triangle out front means change. So change of y over change of x. Y is 1, x is 2. So our slope, our m, equals 1 over 2 for this problem. Now what if I don't give you arrows? I just give you a line and then some points on there. Well, all you're going to do is draw your lines connecting it. To draw your lines, you want half of a rectangle. So you want there to be a right angle between your two lines. And so we're looking at this line right here and this line right here. When we stop, where they cross. So how I would typically draw this is I would do that right there and that right there. And I'm counting how many different boxes we're jumping. So let's look at that. Our change in y is how much we're going up. Going up is always going to be a positive number. So we went up 2. So that's a plus 2. When we're going right, all of our numbers to our right are positive. So if we ended up going left, that would tell me a negative number. But since in this case we're going right, we're going to go positive 3 to our right. Again, it's our change in x or change in y over change in x. Our change in y is that positive 2, and our change in x is that positive 3. So our slope for this one is 2 over 3. So I want you to try these two problems on your own. Notice, if you remember from 7th grade year, if you had me in 7th grade year, we talked about Slope Dude, which I will link a video to Slope Dude so you can watch it if you forgot what it is. But basically, there is a sketch like this on the screen. And Slope Dude wants to run this course with his skis. So when he goes up the hill, he says puff, puff, positive, all the way up the hill. So any line that looks like that, up and to the right, is a positive slope. Then he gets to the top of the hill and he starts going down, and it's really easy, so and it's really fun too. So he says nice negative. And so if it goes up and to the left, that means that it's going to be a negative slope. When he gets to this part of the trek that he's doing, that is zero fun because he is just walking. It's hard to walk with all the snow and the skis, so it is zero fun. So this is a slope of 0. And then he gets to the end of the cliff and it's kind of foggy and he does not see the road in front of him and he accidentally falls off this cliff and he yells the worst curse word ever in all of mathematics and algebra, which is undefined. So if you have a slope that is straight up and down, it is going to be undefined. So that being said, when we're looking at these two equations, automatically, I know that if I do not have a negative fraction at the very end, I am wrong because these both go up and to the left. So I know both of these slopes are negative. So anyways, pause the video, try to figure out these slopes best you can, and then check with me after. I was actually able to simplify both of these problems. So this first graph simplifies to a -1 slope, and the second graph simplifies to a -3 slope. Now what I want you to do is I want you to graph these 2 points and figure out your slope from that graph. So go ahead, pause your screen, graph those 2, and figure out the slope. And you should have gotten that it is a change of 4 over a change of 4, which simplifies down to a +1. So now we are going to be working on part B, which is our tables. So we're using that same formula that we started out with. I just have a table. So a table is going to be a bunch of points. So rather than graphing it and finding the slope, if I'm given the table, I can just find out the slope from that table. So in order to do that, I'm looking at the change in y over the change in x. So I'm going to say that this is point number 1 and this is point number 2. For this first number, I'm looking for y2. Y is right here, so I'm looking at these two numbers, and then 2 is right here, so I'm looking at those two numbers. The only number that it crosses is 4, so my 4 is going to go there. Next number I'm looking for is y1, so there is my y again, and then this time it's y1. So that is going to be 0 or number 0. So it's a subtraction of 0. 4 minus 0 gives me 4. So I know my top is going to be 4. Now I have to figure out the bottom. I'm looking for my x2. So my x is in that column right there. So I know it's going to be one of those two numbers. And I'm looking for x2, which is right here. So that's 0. So I know my first number is a 0. Again, just like the top, it's a subtraction problem, so I'm going to subtract my x1, x1. So x is right there, so I'm sticking with that column. And then I'm looking at x1, which is going to be a +2. So I'm going to write a +2 there. 0 minus 2 gives me a -2. Now let's go ahead and simplify this. I know 4 divided by -2 is going to give me a -2. And that's going to be my slope is -2. So go ahead and try this problem here. If you need to, go back and re-watch me teaching the equation or the table, that first problem there. Afterwards, I am going to have the answer on the screen. So pause the video now and then check your answer after. And this is what you should have gotten for your answer. So looking at the y's, I'm subtracting y2 minus y1. So 3 minus 0, which is what I have written right there. And that equals 3. And then I have x2 minus x1. So 2 minus 0, which is what I have written there. And that equals 2. 3 over 2 can't be simplified anymore. So that's what it's going to be, is just 3 over 2. Now we're moving on to part C. Part C is just given 2 points. So if you remember from what we just did, we didn't really need this whole table. We were given 2 points on this table, or we picked out 2 points on this table to figure out the slope. In this part, we're just given the 2 points as they are. And so that's the form that you typically write it in. If you, for whatever reason, like looking at that table more than you like looking at those 2 points, you can always make yourself a table. So we can say x, y, and then we can say for this first point here, our x is -1 and our y is -3. For our second point here, our x is -7 and our y is +9. And then you can do the same thing that we just did with the change in y and the change in x in that table form. Personally, I don't care if I look at tables or if I just look at those equations. So I'm going to teach you it now in the way that I typically do points. So let me clear those drawings out. So we're still looking for y2 and y1. So I always write x, y over top, just so I don't get confused. I always say that the second point is point 2 and this first point is point 1. So we are looking at our change in our y's. So these second numbers are our y's. So I'm going to connect them with a big rainbow line up top. And then we have to subtract our x's as well. So I'm going to do a big upside down rainbow connecting those two x numbers. And I'm going to subtract them. So what I'm doing now is I am taking y2 minus y1. So y2 is 9 minus y1 is -3. So 9 minus -3. And that equals, once I KCO it, I can tell that it equals 9 plus 3, which is 12. And then on my bottom, I'm looking at my two x's. So just like before, I took 9 minus -3. So I'm going to take -7 minus -1. Make sure you're going in that same direction. So I took from the second point first, that's my first number, and then I took from my first point second, just like how that equation's written, y2 minus y1. So I'm going to do that on the bottom, -7 minus -1. I'm going to KCO that because I don't like that. It looks really ugly to me. So we're keeping the -7. We're changing that subtraction to addition. And the opposite of a -1 is a +1. So I have -7 plus 1. And that gives me a -6. So I've got a +12 over a -6. If I threw that into my calculator, I would figure out really quickly that it is equal to a -2. And that's going to be my answer, is -2. Now I want you to try this problem on your own. So I gave you 2 more points. Figure out what the slope is from those 2 points. And for this problem, you should have gotten a +2 this time. So 12 minus 4 equals 8, and 6 minus 2 equals 4. 8 divided by 4 is going to give me 2. So if you have any questions, please send me an email. Otherwise, you can start your homework, which is listed here.